End scene.
Welcome. I'm Julia from the VC EDU team. Really excited about tonight's seminar. We have Dana Merwin, who's an IDA Program Officer, and she'll be talking to us a little bit about some tips and tricks for grant writing. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dana.
For those of you unfamiliar with IDA, I want to speak briefly about the big picture. One of our greatest features is Getting Real, and it is a conference that's held every 2 years. And this year, not surprisingly, it was held virtually, but it made it so much more accessible. We had 3,000 people from all over the world this year, and what a convening. You can go to documentary.org and learn more about IDA. We also are a membership organization. We offer resources, educational resources. We have a fiscal sponsorship program. Our fiscal sponsorship program has helped distribute over $27 million to projects over just the last 3 years. Our fiscal sponsorship program is much older than that. So this is just reporting over the last 3 years. From 2016 to 2019, between the Enterprise Documentary Fund and the Pere Lorenz Documentary Fund, we've granted over $3 million to 82 different projects. So we're very happy to be a funder. So my words today are not gold. They come from a point of view. They come from a point of view from even, the grants that we manage and what we're looking for. Different funders may be looking for different things, and that's what always makes your head spin in this process. So I sympathize, I empathize with all of the many steps you have to take. But hopefully today we'll kind of just speak to some of those truths. When you're going into grants, you can't put all the pressure of getting a grant just on that application. And that making your film, as some of you already know, is a very holistic approach. So, we won't speak to all the facets of this in this talk, but I would be remiss not to mention that, not only is it fundraising, but it's talking about your film at fellowships or pitch forums. It's going to Getting Real and maybe meeting someone in the chat or even in this amazing space that y'all have together. So the more opportunities you have to talk about your film, the easier it will be to write about your film, which I think for a lot of filmmakers we find is challenging because you're like, I got in this to make pictures and sound and movies, not write a description of it, but it's part of it. So hopefully the more you're able to verbalize it, it will also translate to your grant writing. So once again, I want to acknowledge you're probably not just going to fund your film on grants. And if you do, that's great. But we want to acknowledge that there are crowdfunding resources, there are private funders, there are issue-oriented organizations. Why is this substantial? Because a lot of times makers are having to craft different things for all of these funds. And I'll talk a little about that, especially in the scope of the work sample. So keeping this in mind. So what are you doing? Just give me the money already. I understand completely. But I need you to do this. I need you to promise me these 4 things, whether you choose to, put your hand on the trackpad that is your computer. Not every grant is for everyone. Read the guidelines. I'd say that's the most common mistake we see. We will get 300 applications probably for the development grant. Traditionally, that's what we have gotten in the past 3 open calls. Myself and my colleague Kenny Brown will go through these applications just to make sure they meet the criteria. So please read the guidelines. If it's not just for ours, it's for someone else's. And then there's always that question like, well, I'm not sure. Try to reach out to the program officer via email, via phone, whatever option they're offering you. And then I would say what I find that a lot with folks applying is like, I don't know if I'm in the development stage or the production stage. Well, in that case, I'd say go ahead and apply. And then with our reviewers, we can kind of determine that. So if there's some things where you're like, I'm not sure, then more than likely, don't regret not applying and apply. But if it's just like apples and oranges, and you realize there's other major guidelines that you don't fit, don't apply. Don't procrastinate. You've been hearing that for a long time. I'm sure your mom and your dad and school. What happens when you procrastinate? Well, one, you can literally get locked out of the system and not apply. Ours, we use Submittable, which is a free online portal, but it'll shut down. And then you're going to email me the next day and say, hey, Dana, I couldn't get, I had an internet thing and this happened. And I'll probably be like, okay, but do you really want to start out on that foot? I know I don't. Production rules, right? Like early means what? On time means you're 15 minutes early. Isn't that a production rule? That's one I live by. Read it out loud. We're going to talk about this a little more, but writing is such a personal thing, and we all have different styles of writing, but I promise you, across the board, whatever you write, I feel like it just comes to life and really points at things that are not necessary or confusing when you read them out loud. So even if you feel siloed in this moment and it's only you working on this project, we all have other voices in our head, and so they can kind of help critique, like, oh, that didn't sound right. Yeah, I don't think I really use that word very often. Yeah, where did that come from? The thesaurus? Probably. It's all a process. Now, if you're lucky enough to have, I don't know, a bunch of people in a grant writing class together, or other colleagues around you, show it to others. We're not magic humans. Whatever your colleague or friend or sister, when they read that application and they're like, I don't get this, or boy, there's a lot of characters. It's like 15 characters. I can't really track which one's doing this, who's doing that. All of those things are relevant, not only to them, but they will be to us. Like I said, we don't have magic insight into your application or your project. And so try to fix those before they get to us, because, once we determine that you fit the grant, they're going to reviewers. And what makes a grant less competitive is confusion. And out of 300 applications, we don't have the ability to go back to, your film and be like, what do you mean by this? Or what is this? What's going on here? So all things to consider, if you keep getting the same note. Similarly, if you've completed a project and you had a screening of your film or your podcast, and someone, was like, I'm unclear about this, and you find like, all right, one person said it, whatever. But if 5 people keep saying it, maybe it's worth trying to fix. So those are kind of a few guidelines. Now, what do I see the most common mistakes? Formal language. What does that mean? For those who had any sort of academia in their life, maybe we have to unlearn some things, because as an artist, we really do want to hear your voice, and we don't want a textbook or a term paper. It goes back to learning, how your voice translates to writing, how you're able to describe this visual thing and put it on paper. So that's the one thing. Like, we're not professors, we're not grading your paper for that. We're really looking for story. We're looking for story. And what we see often is the next one is a lack of visual storytelling. So if you're in a development grant, maybe you don't have a sample reel, but you've been with the story, or you're developing a relationship with the story, or where it takes place, and describe those things. One of the things we say is, if you have a scene, describe that scene to a friend like you would at a bar, and see how that even would translate to paper. Because I think for me as a writer, I almost always like saying it rather than going straight to the computer, because I feel like I create a different language when I'm typing directly to it. So try that. See if that's if there's a difference. If you're getting stuck with just like, try and talk it out. When we see applications that they don't match the work sample too. I think there's some disparity there, as if you're, describing this, lyrical film, and then the work sample doesn't look like that at all. We're just, once again, there's confusion. We're like, which film are they making? So that part is important. The other thing is there's too much issue over story. Kind of goes back to that. We want to know that you're doing the research. For the Enterprise Fund, we want contemporary urgent stories. And in the core application, it says story summary, and that's kind of like you talking about the specifics of your story. And then you're also, maybe it's about immigration and your access and your point of view on that story. But then, give us the context, which we're going to talk to in a minute. But don't lose that balance. Like, when I finish your application, I don't want to be like, wow, I feel like I just got a real good case study in immigration, but I don't know what story this filmmaker's telling. I don't know what their film is about. So keep that balance in mind. Okay, so I gave you kind of a cheat sheet of what we're seeing a lot of, and these I'm going to reiterate. These are things that you can do to prevent those other things. On this list, I mentioned short active sentences. This kind of feeds into like your log line. We could do probably a master class on log lines, asking others to read it. So hammering home the rule of threes. Maybe by this time, this is the third time you've seen some of these. Your work sample. This is going to be specific to grants, especially for us. Most of us we require 15 to 20 minute for production funding. The development does not. We'll talk about that later. Don't try to tell the whole story. Give us context. So if you're providing us, a scene, set that scene up. You have ability to do that in the application. If you've only shot for one day, and this is, that interview with your main character, you're submitting it because you feel like it shows that this character can support 60 minutes on screen. If this, had any sort of context to where you are now, you just kind of like, but you don't have the new work sample. Say, oh, well, this was shot here, and I'm providing this scene because, it'll play into this later. So just give us context. We don't know the characters you already love. I feel like what that means is, like, if you have a scene and the person is, very emotive and is really opening up in a deep emotional moment, but you put that at the beginning of your sample, just like any viewer, we haven't had a chance to connect with them, and maybe there's no context. Give us that runway to meet them. Choose a scene that represents character, style, and access. Once again, we're really looking for insight on how the larger project will develop. I've kind of been building these points in as we were talking to get to this moment. Things to guide your application. I mentioned this with context. So you're gonna, when you're doing a documentary core app, you'll see the place that says topic summary. And this is kind of giving us the scope. If it's an election story, great. Tell us, it's 2020. This is the election. This is what's going on in this country, and these are the focus of this situation. The clarity is going to be, well, who are you following in this story, and what's the context that they have in relation to that? So and She Could Be Next. That's an election story about the 2018 midterms. Their specific entry point is following women of color who are running for office for maybe the first or second or third time, and what brings them into the election, and why is that important? And why is that not only important for them, but for the country? And the vision of that, for that grantee, is that their entire crew was also made up of women of color. And so that artistic vision, that decision from the start of that project was very clear and was very uncompromising, and gave us real insight on how that election film might be different than another 2018 midterm film following women of color. So, an overview for the development grant. We typically get 300 applications. There will be awarded 10 grants for $15,000. I know that those numbers are harrowing, but we really encourage you to apply. It doesn't require a work sample. It is open to short films, feature films, podcasts, AR, VR, emerging formats. It's open to emerging makers, so you don't have to have completed a feature or short before. We do ask that you have a track record in nonfiction making. That means you could have been an associate producer, assistant editor, an editor on someone else's project, and that this is your vision. And the applicant needs to be a director or producer that's involved in the film. It's open to U.S. residents or those with U.S. tax IDs. And if you are an international co-production, that's cool, but your applicant still has to be one of those fit the criteria in terms of having a U.S. citizen resident with a tax ID. And the scope, I think I've kind of said it a few times. For the Enterprise Fund, it really is about asserting journalistic practice. What other stories have been told about this topic? And if you're doing a story on immigration, have you done your homework? Has someone else already told that story from that exact perspective? That's part of the practice. Knowing what else is out there, whether it's articles or films or podcasts, that's also part of the practice. Authorship. How are you related to the story? Why are you the right person to tell the story? These are all part of our inquiry into your application. Contemporary urgent issue. We don't allow historical films, and a lot of people ask about biographies. We have funded one biography, which is Going to Mars, the Nikki Giovanni project, who is a famous poet. And in terms of that film, that was a production film, but they tied it so clearly to present day events and what was happening now. A lot of biographies that are pitched are only historical in their gaze, and those would not fit the criteria. I think that is a great chance to open it up for questions. You mentioned to not use language that is too formal. Is there language that is too informal? I can't think of an instance. I mean, even if you're talking in, the language and the tone, of the community and of the place. And I've done these grant writing sessions for people where English was not a first language. And they asked about that. And they're like, we feel, is that going to make us less competitive? And when it's clear in the application that the applicant, if English isn't their first language, then you're forgiving of those things. If the story is in a community where English is not the first language, we can connect those. So, we welcome that. That makes it authentic. I think that's what we're looking for, right? We're looking for authenticity. So I can't think of an instance. If you have a specific question or a word, maybe email it to me. I welcome profanity in most instances, so whatever feels authentic. How much a factor in the consideration process is the applicant's ethnicity and background? Great question. We publish our slate. We're very transparent that we are looking to provide topics and filmmakers, and that diversity inclusion is very important to us. And when I say us, I mean IDA, I mean MacArthur. It's very important to us. And that a lot of directors are both producers, directors, or BIPOC makers. So we do take that into consideration.
I'm making film with many people. So I wonder, how can I propose my film in the best way?
It's okay to have multiple characters. I think the biggest thing is find a way in the application that's easy to follow. And I will share some things I've seen. I've seen bullet points or numbering. Some people will be like, bullet point, Dana. Dana has just moved to LA and is entering the film industry. She has no connections and no resources. What will become of her? The next one, name, character name, storyline or story arc. And I've literally seen that with as many as 5 or 6 characters. And she could be next. If you have seen that series, it turned into a series. When it was pitched to us, it was only a feature. But that has a number of women that they followed, and not all ended up in the film. So when they were writing the application, they also did screen grabs or headshots of each of the women. And they also wanted to represent these women and show these women of color that were running for office. So that's another way that they helped the reviewer be like, okay, you know, especially if there's a work sample, they could easily be like, duh, 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 duh. I'm not saying you have to do headshots for that, but I think doing the listing can be a really simple way to track multiple characters and multiple storylines. So one of the top questions from a reviewer is going to be, how do you integrate them, and how do you not make it feel segmented? I don't have the answer to that. I'm just saying that's what a lot of reviewers ask. If there's multiple groups, you know, say there's a group in some people in Alaska, there's some people in Georgia, you know, and you're following all these folks. So then how do they all tie together if they're not already living and working and doing the thing together? If you've updated your footage sample since submitting, do reviewers consider the updated sample during the review process? The short answer is we ask you not to update your sample, because what happens is, so we will assign reviewers 20 projects, and there'll be as many as 18 reviewers. And for each project, there's 2 reviewers. So, and they have 6 weeks to review those 20 projects. So if reviewer 1 watches your sample, say on day 1, and they write their review, and then reviewer 2 doesn't get to yours until 6 weeks later, and if you've updated that sample, they will be reviewing and watching something completely different, and then there's disparity. And we don't have the resources to be able to go back to reviewer 1 and be like, hey, there's a new sample, can you watch it? And then, oh, well, maybe it's changed again, and oh no. And then you see where that puts us with your project, and it gets confusing. And so once you submit, we ask you not to change. In the production fund, if you're a finalist, oftentimes we give you the opportunity, we come to you and we're like, hey, do you have an updated reel? So that's where we are. How strict is IDA on filmmakers only being eligible in pre-production phase? How is that measured? In other words, some filmmakers start shooting, then edit, then go back and do research and development. If a film were partially shot but still working to create a fundraising video, or do archival research, or write a script, which I think is pre-production, would that film be eligible to apply? Great questions. This is where defining a phase is hard, right? Because of, all those things. Like when you're making a film, it's not just one way, and everyone does it different. So we try to say that as long as you have not completed a majority of principal photography. Now, what does that mean? If you have a project that only requires, let's say, a 10-day shoot, 10-day project, and you present the timeline and schedule, and you've already completed half of that, we don't break it. I think ITVS breaks it down into percentages, and I think theirs is something like no more than 25% or 20% of principal photography. We're not as hardline as that. So, you know, for better or for worse, that means we are a little more gray. And if you think you're in development, then you probably are. So I would encourage you to apply. And if we see it and the reviewers have consensus that you're further along, then, and you can meet the criteria of the production grant, we would say, hey, you actually should apply to the production grant. We've actually had it work in the reverse too, where people have applied to the production grant and we're like, this is still pretty early. Like we think you should actually apply to the development fund. So that's where I would say we're not especially strict, and then we really try to look from project to project to see where folks are.
What are best practices in writing about a series in a grant?
A series is definitely eligible for the development grant. We have yet to fund a series. The thing, because it is such a different beast, right? From what I understand, the reason it is so complicated is, you're trying to outline all those episodes. Like if you really have a vision for each of those episodes, you really kind of have to outline each of those to say like, okay, it's going to be a 4-part series, and this is happening in 1, this is happening in 2, and this is happening in 3 and 4. So that's why it's so challenging. How much should your film have evolved since last applying? Would you need a new or updated sample? Specifically to the development fund, yes, you can apply again. We ask filmmakers not to expend additional resources. So if you have one that you've been working on since last year and you feel like it represents the project in a better way or stronger way, then use it. But if it is the same reel, that's okay too. We often say though, if you could describe in the application what has changed for you. We do track a lot of projects, and we will, if it resonates with us, we will be like, it saves us time from being able to go to the last year and be like, oh, what A, B. So just be transparent in that, since our last application, X, Y, and Z has evolved. These have been the new additions. If the sample hasn't changed, it's okay to say. And we're going to have new reviewers, so it'll be new to them. So that's also what's exciting, is every year there's new folks. For a series, is it okay to have 4 planned episodes but only 1 character thus far? How developed do you want a series application to be? It is a great question, and now I can see where some of these multi-character questions are coming from. I think it's development, and especially if you're letting us know, what you envision in your casting. I'll use that word. Let us know what you are hoping to fill those other episodes with, even if you don't have them confirmed. What do you want? Who do you want to see represented in this series? Say it's a series on women in medicine, and are you having a series on pregnancies, and what type of women do you want to be represented in the episode on pregnancies? Doctors, just let us know who you're looking for, and that will give us a greater scope of what you're trying to build. So that's okay to envision the people that you don't have secured yet. Thank you all for sharing, and good luck with all of your projects, and yeah, be well, be safe. Thank you.